This is an argument between physics and politics, and physics will always win.
I think that the chances right now to achieve net zero in 2050 with the current policies is zero. And that is going to be significantly more expensive than what the benefit that you get from energy efficiency.
Welcome to the Capital.com debate. Today we're running an economic fact check on the green transition. The war in Ukraine has sent energy prices soaring around the world, sparking a full-blown energy crisis. At the same time, the urgency of the climate crisis has spurred governments to recalculate how their energy is generated. The question at the heart of our debate today: is net zero by 2050 achievable? And what are the economic implications of the green energy transition? Joining us to discuss are Tom Burke and Daniel Lacalle. Tom Burke has been an environmental activist for decades. He's chairman and founding director of E3G, an independent climate change think tank, and he's also former executive director of Friends of the Earth. We're also joined by Daniel Lacalle. He's chief economist at Tressis, one of Spain's biggest wealth management firms. Thank you both for joining us today. Quick disclaimer before we get started: our guests today are not connected with Capital.com, and any views they may express are personal to them and are not representative of Capital.com, nor do their views constitute trading advice. So, without further ado, let's get started on the debate itself. The key question at the heart of this debate: is the transition to net zero actually achievable, or is it just a pipe dream? Tom, why don't we start with you?
Is it achievable technologically? Yes. We have the technology already that we would need to get to net zero, and we've got a lot more to come. There's an awful lot of research going on triggered by the challenge, so we're going to have the technology. We do not have a technology problem. Can we deploy that technology fast enough? I think that's a much more difficult question. We're not looking for a whole raft of new technologies to do this, but we are looking for new ways of thinking about things, new ways of organizing things, new policy measures, and we're certainly looking for a lot more political commitment. I think if we have a real problem with getting there, it's a political problem, not a technology problem, and not really an economic problem.
Interesting. Daniel, what are your thoughts?
I think it's virtually impossible to achieve the 2050 target, not just because, yes, we do have some technology, but not enough technology to provide a level of energy policy and at least a level of supply of energy that is, as it is right now, secure and at the same time affordable. It is both an economic and resource problem. We do have the technology to improve, and quite significantly, and we have to be positive about it because we have improved very, very rapidly. But it's virtually impossible to reach the level of mining of lithium and cobalt and all of the rare earths required for the net zero target by 2040, let alone by 2030 or earlier. No? The biggest challenge in energy policy is always that energy has to be following the principles of security of supply, of affordability, and obviously of environmental at least an environmental level of being positive with the environment. And I think that those three can be achieved, but they're not at that space, and certainly not at that pace, because in the next few years, it's going to be impossible to reach the level of mining, of copper, of lithium, etc., that is required to do it.
Tom, I want to give you an opportunity to respond.
I have a bit more faith in human beings, and human beings particularly under stress. Nobody would have thought that 12 months ago that Germany could get off Russian gas without disrupting its economy completely, yet putting its mind to it, it's actually managed to do that pretty successfully. In the Second World War, the US turned its whole industry from producing cars to producing tanks in 12 months, with a lot less capability to change things then than we have now. So I don't think there's I don't think you've got any reason to think we can't do something if we set our mind to it. Now, Daniel's right about that criteria that you have to meet. It has to be secure and it has to be affordable. But I don't think the problem with that is technology. The problem with that is whether we adopt the right kind of policies, we put the right kind of effort in. And a lot of that depends on how serious you think the problem is.
If I may, I don't think that the example of Germany is a good one, because it's gone from depending on Russian gas to depending on US liquefied natural gas. So it's not something that does anything to the net zero. Actually, it has massively increased its dependence on lignite and on natural gas, unfortunately. No? I think that you're absolutely right. We have the technology and we have the opportunity, but it's not just something that we can change as quickly. Even if we want as humans, and even if we put all of our resources together, think about it. Just to achieve net zero by 2050, we would need to increase the number of copper and lithium mines globally by more than 60 times. That is not just a question of deploying the resources or the will or the political power to do it. It's simply it's an impossibility from a purely mechanical and engineering standpoint.
I spent 20 years working for a very large mining company, and the one thing I became absolutely convinced about is don't believe anything that you hear from the mining industry about what is or is not possible. I frankly think, I don't know where the source of those numbers are, but I would treat them with a considerable amount of skepticism. The underlying point is right. There's a big challenge here. I'm not saying there isn't a big challenge. I'm just saying it's doable if we put our mind to it. We got people on the moon because people put their mind to it and put the resources in. But I go back saying I think the problem is whether we will put that effort or those resources into it. We're not short of copper. We're not short of cobalt. We're not short of lithium. They're all elements. There's as much of those elements on the planet now as there always were. Question is, where are we finding them? Where are we mining them? How much effort are we prepared to put into getting them out?
I want to turn to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which of course has a lot to do with the energy crisis. It's spurred many countries to recalculate their reliance on Russian oil and the viability of green alternatives. It's also caused a lot of turbulence in the sector. So has the turbulence in the energy sector resulting from this invasion of Ukraine made the green transition more or less likely? Daniel, let's start with you this time.
I would say it is more likely. I think obviously humanity tends to react in a very positive way to crisis, because that incentivizes innovation and improvement in technology, and obviously the deployment of alternatives. The oil crisis of 1973 led to the development of the North Sea and so many other alternatives. So yes, I think it has accelerated it. Has it accelerated it enough? I doubt it. And one of the problems I have, for example, with the way that the green transition has been designed in the European Union, for example, and in Germany in particular, comes from the, in my opinion, misguided decision to undertake it while at the same time eliminating the nuclear option, which is critical for decarbonization. So I think that it has accelerated it. It has not changed many things, unfortunately. I come back to the point. The reality, unfortunately, when you look at the details of energy consumption in the European Union, is that it's been more the slowdown of China and the weakening of the prices that have happened since July that have helped not to enter into a much larger energy crisis. And the fact that, as I look out the window, it's not an incredibly mild weather. It's beyond that.
Tom?
When I think about the Ukraine shock, it's a very interesting commentary that people respond to shocks better than they respond to prices, because it wasn't just on gas across the board, massive energy everywhere from everybody to discover savings they could have made all along. that were there in their energy efficiency. So maybe we want more shocks of the right way, but I certainly think it's made it easier to get to net zero. It's created some real political problems that I don't think people have yet thought about. Nevertheless, I think people have now understood that there really are opportunities out there to save things, save energy, and we can take those opportunities if we put our mind to it.
So Tom, as a follow-up there, you've been speaking about the ability of this shift. It's obviously a monumental challenge. You've been saying you think it's a challenge that is surmountable. What do you think are the biggest obstacles to achieving net zero?
Funnily enough, I think Daniel raised one of the biggest obstacles, which is the nuclear delusion. I mean, the thing to remember about climate change is this is an argument between physics and politics, and physics will always win. And there's a time constraint on this. It's not just that we have to get somewhere, and markets are very good at exploring the least cost way to get somewhere, but not if you put a time band on them. There is a time band on this, and frankly, nuclear is already too expensive, and if you try to do a lot of it, gets more expensive because you've got very constrained supply chains for specialist skills and specialist materials. So you really have got a time problem if you want to go with nuclear. You want to do the things you know how to do fast and quickly, and the thing we know how to do fastest and quickest actually is to improve energy efficiency, particularly in our buildings. And we know how to do that, and that's where we should be putting our real shoulder to the wheel in terms of then taking the opportunity presented by the Ukraine and driving that forward.
I think that energy efficiency is absolutely critical. No one denies it. But energy efficiency is a step towards net zero, but it does not lead you to net zero. And I completely agree that you're not going to solve the equation that we're trying to get to in such a limited period of time by building massively more nuclear. I think that you're actually going a few steps back, unfortunately, and we have seen it in Germany, that has increased its dependence on lignite, which is coal for everybody that's watching us or listening. So the problem is not just taking the measures that are required in order to get to net zero by 2050 and do it efficiently, as Tom is saying, which I think I agree 90% with it, is that a lot of the misguided policies that are talking vehemently about net zero and about the climate change challenge are actually going back. And I come back to the point of what has happened in the European Union. It's not been a good idea, to be fairly honest.
One of the biggest drivers of increased energy costs in Europe over the last few months has been the failure of the French nuclear program to deliver because of corrosion problems. And I don't think you should shut down any existing nuclear power stations unless it becomes unsafe to do it. So it's not a question about it's whether any more nuclear would actually help you deal with the problem. And just to set a perspective on that, it's really important as you look again at the economy as a whole, 70% of the fossil fuels we burn ends up as waste heat. Now that's concealed in the standard graphs you see which show primary energy demand. Well, primary energy demand doesn't mean anything except to commodity buyers. Actually, what people rely on are the services that energy supplies. And 70% of what we use to supply those services is waste heat. You're going to have a massive increase in the productivity of your economy if you drive that out. Now, Daniel's right, that doesn't get you all the way there. It may not even get you 80% of the way there, but it's the fastest, quickest, and a way it just distributes the benefits of a capital spend fastest that you can do. So if we're not doing that, and we're not really doing that anywhere at the level it could be done, then we're already trying to drive this forward with a halter on our back.
If you want to trade the markets, Capital.com provides the tools and insights you need to learn, trade, and invest smarter. Tap into up-to-the-minute market insights and trading signal tools, the Capital.com Academy, and watch more of our cutting-edge films, all for free. And the Capital.com platform offers thousands of instruments on global markets that can be traded as CFDs. Just tap the link in the description or search for Capital.com in the App Store. Right. So we've been orbiting this topic. I want to dive directly into it, talking about green technology, renewable technology, and nuclear as well off the back of that. First, there's a lot of debate about whether or not renewable alternatives are even up to the task of providing or satisfying the globe's essentially appetite for energy, and whether those options are actually affordable. So, Daniel, why don't you start here? Do you think that the available green technologies that we have on the table can actually satisfy that need?
Relatively, yes. There's been a huge improvement in efficiency and a huge improvement in productivity of renewable technologies. But so far, we cannot change what is, so far it's at least economically and certainly technologically impossible right now to solve the equation of volatility and intermittent technologies. The renewables, by definition, are volatile and intermittent, and energy supply needs to be constant. And the more difficult that we make it for renewable energies to become baseload energy, the more that we will take to get to the 2050 target. That is something that requires a tremendous amount of investment. The battery rollout is not yet a solution, and certainly not a viable economically or even industrially feasible solution. But I'm a big defender of human work, and I think that we will see vast improvements in it. It's not there yet, but I think it may come, and it may come faster than we think. We might need a shock, as Tom said before, but it is not there today.
So you've been mentioning the shortcomings. Tom, do you think we're being overly optimistic about green tech then?
No, I think we are being pessimistic, actually, and I think Daniel's being a bit pessimistic. The investors have already made their mind up. Renewables were the largest in terms of electricity generation last year around the world. Renewables attracted more investment than any other form of electricity production. And what's more, the reason for that is it's actually cheaper to provide electricity from renewables pretty well everywhere in the world now than it is even to provide it from existing gas or coal technology. So there's a lot of evidence out there that investors, opportunity seekers, are already beginning to pursue. But one of the obstacles are really old-fashioned ideas and pre-digital age ideas like baseload. It's over a decade. The then head of the national grid said baseload in Britain said baseload is an outmoded concept over a decade ago. And
he was wrong.
Well, are renewables variable? Yeah, sure they are. Sometimes it really is. You do not have to be a clever scientist to work this out. The wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. By the way, as the French have just discovered, sometimes 60% of your nuclear power stations don't work either. No generation is on all the time. Nothing is on all the time. The question is, can you deal with that variability? And yes, I mean, we don't let Daniel come back, but I think there are lots of ways to deal with that variability. Some of them which will make your electricity even cheaper.
I don't dispute the fact that renewable energy is economically viable. That no one has denied that. That is not the question. The question is that people, when they switch on the light, they expect light to come out. And that's not an easy thing, and you're absolutely right, even if you have 70% nuclear, of course. No one ever said that you had to have 100% nuclear or 100% gas or 100% hydro. It's insane anyway. What you cannot have is a system that relies economically, well-being, you name it, on the importance of security of supply and affordability, and expecting simply to deal with variability and volatility. Let's see how, because the grid doesn't work like that. We need an energy mix that has enough capabilities and enough availability of different sources, so that when your nuclear plant is shut down for technical reasons, or your wind farms are shut down because there's too much wind, which happens, then you have an alternative. That is the only thing that I'm saying. And that is not cheap, by the way. That is not going to be cheap.
The one thing Daniel and I definitely agree about completely, we've agreed several things actually, but the one in particular he just emphasized, I completely agree with. The test for an electricity system is when you put the switch, the electricity flows. And if you can't deliver that, it's not a workable, viable system. We will spend £60 million a day paying people to turn off their wind power. We pay them not to use it because we can't use the electricity. The reason we can't use the electricity is because we haven't invested enough in the grid. The reason that matters when you're talking about long periods, maybe 2 or 3 weeks where you have low wind, is because we're not using that electricity to make hydrogen, which we could then use in our existing gas-fired power stations to cover us in that period.
I wanted to ask about and pick up on economic viability. Not just economic viability, but a lot of people, when they talk about green transition, supporters will argue that it could actually be economically beneficial and could be a boon for the economy. Daniel, what are your thoughts on this idea that it could actually be very good for the economy, could be a boon for the economy?
Oh, it can be good for the economy, of course, and it can be good for the economy if it's done the way that all energy transitions have been done, by allowing the alternatives to become not only cheaper in relative terms, but cheaper in absolute terms, including the cost of grids and the cost of additional network requirements, etc. Absolutely, it can be beneficial. I think that what is misguiding citizens is to say that it's going to be immediately economically beneficial, and that is simply not true. It requires very, very significant investments up front, massive investments up front that are going to make it more expensive short term can be a decade, by the way, short term for customers. So energy transition is on the long term, and we can discuss about different periods of time, but the mistake and what gets people actually, and worries me, that people become against energy transition from in the way that Tom is presenting it, and myself, which I think we agree on most of it, is that it's being sold as something that is going to reduce electricity bills now, not happening.
I agree with Daniel in the fact that where we will get to will be an energy system that powers our economy much more effectively. How do we get there? And who pays is the question. Do we have to invest in order to get there? Yes, we do. Of course we have to invest. Do we have to push people's bills up in order to do that, which is a much more significant political question? Well, that depends on how cleverly you go about it. If you go about it stupidly, you will put people's bills up a lot. If you're smarter about how you do it, you won't push people's bills up as much or even that significantly. We have wasted the last 10 years of not spending money, not even spending money that we've committed to improving the energy efficiency of our buildings. We can do that actually pretty fast. We're good at that kind of change, and that will get bills down right away. Does that mean you've got to slow down investment? No, it doesn't. Does that mean you've got to have both a combination of public and private investment? Yes, it does. That's exactly what has been recognized by the Biden administration in the US, and which the EU is now following, that you've got to be prepared to create the public investment that will leverage massive flows of private investment in order to get those benefits. And you'll get those benefits faster and cheaper if you do that smartly than if you do it stupidly.
Yeah, but be it public or private, it's the consumer that pays. It doesn't matter. The public money doesn't come from, I don't know, the sky. It comes from taxpayers. So I'm not even debating the concept that there needs to be public and private collaboration. Absolutely there is, but that is going to be significantly more expensive than what the benefit that you get from energy efficiency.
Whoa.
Obviously it will. But obviously it will. But it's just not even just the fact that networks need, at least in the US and the European Union, at least, and it's being 10 trillion of added investments in order to accommodate for the green transition. that is going to make bills soar with energy efficiency or not. And again, the only thing that we need to be is understanding that that cost may be acceptable and actually maybe not only may be beneficial, but will be beneficial. The problem is telling people that it's going to lower their bills now. It's not going to happen. It is not happening anywhere in the world.
I completely agree with you about the failure of the politicians on this issue, but you can't draw your system boundary around this in terms of what will make energy more or less expensive without adding into that equation what happens if you go on burning fossil fuels. Those are costs we're barely counting in any of these equations. We're not counting any.
No, I'm not saying
No,
that.
I know you're not. I'm not saying you're saying it, but I'm adding, if you like, to your argument. Yeah, you better get the right signal in your bills, because some of those things don't turn up in your bills. And all those people who've got flooded all over Europe, actually, this last summer, are paying the bill for the burning of fossil fuels. That's exactly where it comes out. So, yeah, the question is, when you look at the whole system, is it a better bet for consumers than the current system? And my argument is, yes, it is a better bet.
So I want to jump in here on this note of public versus private and just put this question directly. You've been mentioning the shortcomings of politicians in this space. Do you guys think that the public or private sectors are better suited to be stewards of reining in the clean energy transition? The shortcomings of politicians in mind, is the private sector better suited, or do they both face the same kind of limitations?
I think we're agreed it has to be a partnership. It has to be an alignment. The public sector can't do it on its own. And the last thing I would want is to do what the British Labour government wants to do, and that's create a publicly owned generating company, because that seems to me a completely backward and 20th century idea. On the other hand, the idea that somehow you can leave it to the market and jiggle with prices of this or that so that you get this right also seems wrong. Confidence is the thing. What we're really arguing about is the pace. We're not arguing whether the change should take place. We're arguing about what's the right way to get this to move fastest. And you can't get that if you don't have a level of confidence in the private sector that governments will stick to their policies when they put them in place. And so that more than anything, the stability of the policy is almost more important than the policy itself in terms of leveraging private investment.
I cannot agree more. I think that the public sector is critical for one very simple thing: is regulatory risk is one of the things that is keeping the energy transition from happening faster. And this is a break on investment. It's destroying confidence in numerous countries. So what the public sector is a facilitator and needs to provide stability in regulation, stability also in cost of capital, and the cost of capital includes managing the budget adequately, because you're not doing crazy things, and also providing a certain element of support to private investments in the areas, in regulated activities that, for example, require a significant level of government approval, like networks. And we come back to the crucial point, is that networks are going to be the driving factor in improving the availability of clean energy. That is absolutely fine. But the vast majority has to come from the private sector, but with the right level of confidence, with governments that actually stick to their policies and do them correctly and don't change mid-course 3, 4, 5 times. It's incredible to see. If you look at the number of times in which in the European Union, by country, regulation on energy has changed in the last decade, it's simply uninvestable. So all of those things, I think we agree. But I think that who leads? Definitely the private sector, because it was the private sector that found the way to make the solar panels more efficient and 80% cheaper. It was the private sector that actually made the windmills all over the world more reliable and more efficient. And it's going to be the private sector that solves the equation, the challenging equation of access to mining and batteries.
I agree with Daniel, but I'm not sure I'd count the Chinese solar industry as necessarily what he and I would both think of as the private sector. that has certainly driven down.
But it's not them. It was not them who brought down the prices of solar panels. They would have kept them high if they could have. They could not. It was actually competition.
But competition matters. But competition, if it's to benefit communities, has to take place inside an envelope of cooperation. If you take that envelope away, by the way, you get the financial crisis, which we're about to repeat. I'm looking at it at the moment. And government provides, and we're just using different language to say the same thing. Government provides that envelope of cooperation that harnesses competition to benefit society as well as individuals. And that's an important part of getting this right.
Now, speaking of competition, I want to shift just a tad over and talk about global competition in this space, especially as more countries now are taking seriously a pivot towards energy independence in the wake of what's happened with the war in Ukraine and rethinking, recalculating where they're getting their energy from. I wonder what your takes are on the role of renewable energy in energy independence. Is renewable energy, our clean energy technologies, the key to unlocking energy independence for a lot of countries or not? Daniel, why don't we start with you?
Energy independence doesn't exist the moment that you define it by something which is a political line, which is a border. Makes no sense. It's ridiculous, no? This concept of energy independence. Why does it have to be independent if your country is divided one way or another? It just makes no sense. No, I think that the way that we need to think about energy independence is not from the perspective of doing everything our own, which is autarky and which is a stupidity. It's an economic and social stupidity and a very dangerous idea. I think that the way to think about energy independence is energy freedom. And energy freedom means that the biggest percentage of what you require to produce energy is within the reach of the consumer and the community close to the consumer from the widest range of sources. And energy freedom is perfectly achievable. Energy independence is a complete nonsense created by protectionist policies and governments that think that a border means anything, which it doesn't, obviously.
We're back again at politicians being the problem. I think, but we agreed earlier, very much at the beginning of the conversation, we both agreed affordable and secure supplies of energy services are what actually matter to consumers and to businesses. So that's the piece you've got to go to. What the particular way of doing that is to some extent geographically fixed. In other words, the answer you're going to come up with in the United States is going to be very different from the answer you're going to come up with in the EU. It's going to be different again for the answers you come up with in Africa. And simply the physics of building networks is going to shift the question. Africa is probably not going to build grids in the same way that Europe and America have built grids, for instance. It's not going to need to. So it's going to have a very different model. So you get back to actually a very interesting question, which we haven't really talked on. We're going to, getting to net zero means getting a much more electric driven economy. That's, I think nobody's arguing about that. Then the question is, how do you organize that market? Now, at the moment, we're still organizing it as a commodity market, and that has lots of the kind of contradictions in it that Daniel was picking up. Actually, what digitization and AI are going to allow us to do is to create electricity markets that are basically a Netflix type market, where you're paying for the service, you're not paying for the commodities. And that's the kind of innovation that really matters, that we're not talking anything like enough about.
I completely agree with that. The level of disruption that artificial intelligence and technology brings to the electrification of the market and the decommoditization of the energy market is absolutely critical. And that requires a lot of effort in terms of cooperation and collaboration between governments all over the world. So actually, I would say stop talking about borders and start thinking about the planet. And because actually, if they care about the planet, which I start to doubt quite a bit, they should be talking about the planet, not about a border, which sounds so stupid to me that I don't even want to continue.
This links nicely into one of our final questions as we wrap up here, which is just about the impact that this transition towards net zero and clean energy might have on financial markets and the energy sector in general. Daniel, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to you, Tom. What do you think this transition? What kind of ripple effects do you think we'll expect to see on the energy sector and global markets?
Well, if politicians and policymakers followed what Tom is saying, which sounds like gold dust to me, hugely disinflationary, no? Beautifully disinflationary, monstrously disinflationary, and very positive for the poorest, very positive for the people that have less benefits, and very significant improvement for the improvement of the weight of small and medium enterprises becoming larger enterprises and being bigger and much more reliable and resourceful in the middle of a crisis. And also, and let's not forget, because we're talking about yet another crisis from doing exactly the same thing, printing money and lowering rates to create inflation from nowhere, it would be very disinflationary and disinflationary in a very good way.
There's a problem, a big political problem, which is not yet talked about anything like enough. Basically, you're going to move from an electrical energy system rich in rents to one that is essentially rent-free. You're going from a commodity market to a service market. The marginal cost of a new electron will be close to zero in that system. That is going to cause real problems, which the pension fund industry and the insurance industries have to think about, because they're going to have to adjust their portfolios quite a lot, because the rents that they've been using won't be there, and it is going to make a big difference to revenues. Mr. Putin, in going to war, has essentially driven about 40% of his national revenues away by persuading Europe to stop using Russian gas. And that's what the logic of I think the kind of electricity system both Daniel and I agree about is. That's a big political problem, which people haven't really begun to think seriously about yet.
And that's why you cannot rely on politicians, because politicians need inflation, want inflation, incentivize inflation, and policymakers incentivize inflation. Therefore, every time that a technology that is disinflationary and that is hugely disruptive as everything that we're talking about today, comes to the fore, it will not be stopped by evil enterprises, or maybe those that are crony to the governments, but it will be stopped by governments that require all those rents that mean revenues that come from nowhere, which is what everybody that's watching us today is paying in their bills, which is a chain of taxes over taxes over taxes and taxes on top.
I want to just make a coda on what Daniel's just said, because people talk loosely about government. And then if people listen to Daniel, think, yeah, let's get rid of government. Getting rid of government is not a good idea. There are two parts to government. There's an administrative part, which works actually reasonably well, especially in Europe. And there's a political part, which is pretty rotten. Whatever part of the spectrum you're looking at it from is pretty suspect. So when you talk about wanting to...
No, I think everybody can understand that I'm not talking about police officers.
I wish everybody did. But anyway, the point is we agree again. It's the politics, stupid.
Right, I'm just aware of time, and I want to ask one final question before we wrap here, which is just I want to get a quick fire take from each of you, bearing in mind everything we've discussed so far in this debate. I want to get your verdicts yet again on this 2050 net zero goal that they were set in the Paris Accords. From each of you, just quickly, what chances do you give for achieving that, and what are some kind of parting thoughts to bear in mind on this subject? Tom, why don't we start with you and then go over to Daniel?
We probably won't make it, but it'll be a political failure.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the chances right now to achieve net zero in 2050 with the current policies is 0%.
But having said that, everything we can do to stop burning fossil fuels will make the pain less.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And by the way, and the positive, to end up in a positive note, is that regardless of the fact that governments will will not make it, it'll.
That brings us to the end of our debate today. Tom and Daniel, thank you both very much for joining us today for this lively discussion. I really enjoyed it. As stated at the top, our two guests today are not connected with Capital.com, and any views that they've aired during the debate are personal to them and are not representative of Capital.com, nor do their views constitute any advice. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay alerted to all of our latest videos, from regular chart analysis on the markets to macroeconomic explainers on the key financial topics of the day.